Well, welcome, Ken, to Empowerment Radio. Courageous Aging is your newest book. And I have to say, when I read to it, I'm not the youngest of people anymore, but I was kind of looking forward to aging and getting older because the way you wrote about aging in the book and the suggestions you made are truly empowering. And so I want to thank you in the name
Thank
of
you.
the many people that will grab this book and will actually have a different, more inspirational view on aging. Thank you very much for sitting down and writing it.
Thank you, Friedemann. We have to change conversation on getting older. If we're fortunate, we get older. And the question is, how do I make this moment and these moments to come my best years ever? That's the only question. And there are specific ways that we can do that. But we've got to change the conversation because there's too many good things ahead.
Well, we also have to change the conversation because at some point, and maybe this is happening already, we older people will be in the majority. And so this is a huge part of society worldwide that really is, in some ways, I believe, and I'm not sure you view, pushed aside a little bit and ignored. And that's certainly
Absolutely. We
now
still live in a youth worshiping world,
exactly.
and you're absolutely right. In the U.S. alone, 120 million people will be over 65 by the year 2020, and that's nothing compared to looking at India and China and other parts of the world. But we are an aging world, and I like to think of us as ripening. And how do we somehow use these years as our best years, not just individually, to make quality of life decisions and experience quality of life, but to really leave a legacy that we can all be very proud of.
Well, that is one part of the book that I really enjoyed, which was kind of later chapters, which we will get into. But first of all, how did you even come about writing this book? What inspired you to do that?
Thank you for asking. I have written a book in every one of the major seasons of my life. As a young man, I was fascinated with the psychology of who I was as a man. I knew that the basic training I got was not going to win me intimacy. It was not going to get me to the point of being the kind of father I wanted to be, the kind of husband I wanted to be, and how I wanted to be with myself, my own self-health, my own personal development and growth. So I wrote a book called The Secrets Men Keep. And that was for that season of life. I then wrote a book about how to talk to your kids. I was raising two daughters, or better yet, they were raising me. and after a major tragedy in my own life, the loss of my oldest daughter, I wrote a book about grief literacy and how we live in a world and many of our cultures really look away from, avoid the issues of loss and don't process them in such a way that it makes us lesser than we could be. And then finally, in this latest season of my life, I've watched the clock ticking. We get into our 60s and we need to realize that life is a lease deal. And how do we prioritize the time we have left, what's most precious and important? And also, how do we opt out of some of these negative messages about, how we are going to lose value, put us out on the 99-cent rack because, we're diminished. We're going to lose value rather than the truth is, and the truth is known in other parts of the world better than in the U.S., that, in India, for example, in age 60, when we look at the stages of life, age 60, you're just waking up. You're just beginning to come into your fullest experience of life, your fullest potential, your wholeness as a human being, the insecurities, the desire to please and placate, the complacency is gone. You're a fully awake human being. So I decided that I needed to immerse myself in this world and deeply understand what was going on in my own life. And if I found something that was important and valuable, to share it with other people, which I've done most all my life. And that's why courageous aging. And I listened to Maya Angelou, who said, courage is the greatest virtue. It's embedded in every one of the other virtues. And I really believe that. So courageous aging is the process of facing into what we're experiencing and making sense of it and changing our trajectory so that we really do become the better, smarter, more courageous, more understanding and compassionate version of ourselves.
Why do you believe so many people resist aging, especially in our time? It feels almost you have to hide that you're younger. You still have to appear like a 30-year-old while you're 75. What is that about?
Well, I think we have an underlying and deeply embedded belief that we lose value because we're older and we can't do some of the things that we used to do. We're in this perpetual state of grieving our younger self. And we're also afraid of the decline and we're afraid of death.
Right.
And I think because we really don't face into the fact that we're changing, we don't embrace our older selves. We don't learn how to do that, nor do we come to terms with and make sense in any way, shape, or form of dying. Of the fact that life is a lease deal. We drain and deplete ourselves, and we live in dread and fear. But the amazing thing is, once we face into those issues that are causing us fear and dread, we liberate ourselves, the emotional freedom, and we get to use every day of the rest of our lives, whatever time we have, in a way that's precious and meaningful, purposeful, and deeply spiritual.
So are you saying that the fears at some point disappear? The fears of, not having so much value, they diminish. Mm-hmm.
I think they diminish. I think rather than being paralyzing, I think we're all works in progress.
Right.
I think, a lot of the things we work on, whether it's intimacy, whether it's overcoming certain fears or anxieties in the course of our lives, we don't just, get it and it's on forever. I think these things kind of bubble back up when we get stronger and we're ready to deal with the next layer of the onion. I think things come back up to us. So, and death is one of those things. But I think we have an enormous capacity to understand life's terms, how life truly is, and to make peace with it. We don't have to like it. We don't have to love it. We don't have to, but we can live in the mystery of it rather than the paralyzing fear of it. And we can deepen our understanding of what this life truly is and open ourselves to the greater possibilities of the great beyond, of what happens beyond this life, this form as we know it.
My work focuses on resolving and outgrowing old fear and anxiety patterns, especially on the level of the subconscious. But the goal is ultimately to gain a deeper understanding and appreciation for yourself, for that truth that doesn't go away, that doesn't age, that doesn't change, but it's just, your foundation. So would it be fair to say the earlier we start embracing our truth, the easier we will age because we are not so attached to our identities and appearances?
Absolutely. I think the more we cultivate and embody the understanding or a sense of peace or reconcile, the less likely we're going to be living in avoidance and terror and fear, and that eats up and wastes the time of our lives, and that also prevents us and inhibits us from going deeper, from realizing, gaining a sense of equanimity, gaining a sense of what we're a part of that's larger than this. I just came from, I was blessed to spend 10 days in the Galapagos. And the Galapagos Islands are the most magical place purity. And when you look at the Galapagos Islands and how they were formed and what's happening to them, and how these beautiful creatures exist on these islands and how they've survived and adapted, they think of things in terms of million-year cycles.
Right. That's right.
We think of things in small cycles, like a lifetime of 70, 80, 90, 100 years maybe. But this is million-year cycles, and we get to experience the enormity and the expansiveness of this universe that we're a part of, and how far-reaching it is, and how big the mystery is that we're a part of. And I think that kind of expansive experience allows us to be more at ease and more at peace, and to reconcile what we are a part of, just as you're saying, and reduce those fears and anxieties, and allow us to enjoy the time we have, and the miracles and the gifts and the blessings that we have.
So true, and very well said. So we will take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Dr. Ken Druck, the author of Courageous Aging, and we'll talk more about the mastery in the game of life and how to just approach this next chapter with greater ease, peace, and freedom. Stay tuned. We will be right back. Welcome back with Empowerment Radio. I'm here with Dr. Ken Druck, the author of Courageous Aging, and we just talked about that there are ways to approach aging with greater ease and peace. And I just want to quote from your book, just a little paragraph that I really found was beautiful. You said, "By the time I hit 50, I had let go of many of the things that plagued me in my younger days. As a young author of 35, I cared more than I'd like to admit about appearances, notoriety, and fame. And now, I may worry about those things momentarily, and then the knowing part of me kicks in. I smile and take a deep breath, knowing I'm the best me that I can be. And that's enough. The confidence that I've grown in my mastery of the game of life, including the keen awareness of how little I really know for sure, brings a feeling of peace and freedom. Yet another perk on the many possibilities I couldn't have imagined as a younger man." Now, I love that because I think so many of us are obsessed with what other people are thinking, how we appear, what's our image. And you talk about the knowing part and the mastery in the game of life. How are they connected, and how did you meet your knowing part? Was it always there, or did it evolve over time?
I think it evolved over time, Friedemann. I think we, when we really have a work ethic and we say to ourselves, you know what, I'm going to become awake. I'm going to reflect about how I'm feeling. I'm not just going to be this reaction. I'm going to reflect about how I feel, what I'm experiencing, what I'm going through. I'm going to find trusted confidants and teachers and mentors who can help me better understand what I'm experiencing, make sense of it, and make good choices. I think, I've been on that path for a long time, just out of curiosity and the desire to make the highest use of the time and the relationships and the opportunities that I have, as well as to be more resilient and to face into the adversities that life has presented for me, losses that I've suffered, setbacks, dry spells that I've gone through, that I think all of us go through. Mm-hmm. So I think, when we see that there's an opportunity, the benefits of really being on a path of having a work ethic and being on a path of growth, self-improvement, continuous improvement, and awakeness, whatever our practices are that get us there. When we do that, I think we develop a greater mastery, even if we don't even notice how much we've grown. Some of us have just grown wonderfully. We've deepened. We're calmer. We're more approachable. We're more loving. We're more unconditionally understanding, more compassionate. and because we've transformed adversity into opportunity, because we've gotten ahead of the pain curve in life and the reaction curve, and our responses are we have more options, and our responses tend to be more effective. So I think that's what's been there for me, and that's the path I've been on, and I'm happy. I'm so much happier and so much more calmer and more secure, not having to be a slave to what one of my mentors used to call status insecurity. Mm-hmm. Mike Friedemann, who wrote the book Type A Behavior in Your Heart, was a mentor and friend of mine. And Mike used to talk about how type A behavior is tied to status insecurity. We're always looking over our shoulder to see how we look and how we're doing, and whether we're lovable and pleasing and approvable and beautiful enough. And you know what? When we calm our hearts, when we're able to look in the mirror and put our arms around that person, that's the start of something good in every direction. That's self-compassion, that's self-acceptance, instead of self-judgment, rejection, self-condemnation, self-deprecation.
Well, it reminds me of my father, who was someone who certainly had type A personality and at times was a little bit of a rageaholic, and how he in his older age really learned to be calmer, to not react, to also in some ways have more understanding and acceptance of the choice, for example, his son made, that were not always the choices he would have made. And that's certainly something that can come with age if, and I think that's a big if there is a certain kind of introspection. In our time, there's a problem which I see. We don't really know the end of it yet, which is that we are avoiding pain. We are avoiding discomfort. We are not looking inside. We are looking on social media or any kind of media to get distracted from ourselves. And so I'm wondering if you notice, you also have a practice where you help people, if you notice that people age or have a harder time with aging, maybe because they have a harder time to go inside and maybe take an inventory or have this, what you call in the book, a self-audit, because they rather not dwell on pain and loss and failures and just look outside for some kind of comfort and joy.
Yeah, I love the way you said that. And by the way, you and I had similar fathers, and deciding to become our own men and learning from our fathers, their pain or their avoidance or their misappropriation of anger were probably strong life lessons for both of us. But I believe that, we have a choice. Yes, I think as we get older, there's the opportunity to soften, to open our hearts and to soften our hearts. That's why so many people claim they're better grandparents than parents. They turned out to be better grandparenting than they were at parenting, because they've softened and they're more patient and they're kinder and are more allowing. They've embraced their own softness, their own vulnerability, and they can reflect that with their grandchildren better than they did when they were parents, trying to be the perfect parent in a younger season of life. I think we do have some extraordinary choices as we get older and as we soften and as we ripen. And we can become crusty. The world can become smaller. We can contract. We can avoid, hide, deny, repress, and run away from, and numb ourselves and become the dumbed-down version of ourselves. And the world invites us to do that as we get older. It invites us to join a shrinking world where we're devalued. We're supposed to retire and go to pasture, and kind of age out. But you and I are probably experiencing the opposite. I turned 69 last week, and I'm in a more creative, energized phase of life than I've ever been. I'm writing prolifically. I am speaking I spoke at the United Nations yesterday. I'm experiencing a kind of reinvention and resurgence in energy in my life, and I'm keeping myself on a learning path. I'm still very curious. I'm keeping my curiosity alive and all the possibilities for new learning and growth. I think we can make that choice, and when we do, it pays off. It suddenly we're living in one of the most interesting seasons of our lives,
Mm-hmm.
and we're attracting people who are doing the same. So I think we have to decide what we're going to cultivate. Are we going to cultivate withdrawal and isolation, and opting into, there's $1 trillion anti-aging industries in the U.S. alone that are trying to brainwash and convince us, most of us, that staying forever young is the answer to happiness. And when we opt out of that, we find that true happiness comes from embracing that older version of ourselves and finding value in that older version of ourselves and celebrating that older version of ourselves and feeling the youth and vitality that is forever there in the older version of ourselves, then we're on a good path.
This has a lot to do then also with being willing to reinvent yourself, like this, title of the book also includes, which I find is for many people so hard. They had a certain kind of identity in their work or in their usefulness or in their community, and then all of a sudden they feel like, well, who am I now that I'm not that person anymore? And I'm just wondering, you suggest a process in the book about self-auditing, and you mentioned that we often grow without even noticing. It's like, the little lines on the wall when we are younger that show us, wow, we actually grew
Yes.
so many inches. And we don't have those lines necessarily on the wall. We are not looking back how much we grew. So does this self-auditing help people, that what you describe in the book,
Yes.
to see I'm actually much more than just those old job descriptions and identities?
Absolutely. You've the bullseye. I put the self-audit at the front of the book and the audio book the Courageous Aging audio book, purposely, so that people could begin to get your foot off your throat. Stop devaluing yourself. Look at and appreciate and be grateful to the things you've done to grow, the things you've accomplished, the things that you can stand on proudly and behind proudly. And when we do a self-audit, it's not only about where we're still very young, where we're still very vulnerable. It's about the whole picture. It's about how our vulnerability is one of our greatest strengths, how we're a work in progress, where we've made tremendous strides forward in our lives that we can appreciate. But it also identifies the hot spots, the opportunity spots, the places where we have the greatest opportunities to grow stronger, diminish our fear, to diminish our anxiety, to diminish our sense of dread, and to reimagine our best possible years, to redraft the vision that we have, not just a bucket list, but a full-on vision for how we want to live in this new season of our life, with whatever transitions we've gone through, whether they're transitions in years because we turned 60 or 65 or 70 or 75, but transitions because we got a diagnosis that tells us we're mortal, or because we've had a change in our relationship, or because, as you said earlier, we've changed our job status and changed. They're taking a different role in work, or we've retired, or we've changed our career in some way. And the fear of losing our identity, our worth, and our status, how to overcome that and see ourselves anew. And that's why I wrote the book, because I think that's such a critically important part of our happiness, of our finding our path forward to joy.
Well, that is really the next point that I wanted to make for you before we go or after the break, which is about this looking forward. And what we are facing when we're aging, looking forward, is often that what we also avoid, which is loss, which is dying. And you have really addressed this beautifully in the book. So when we come back, we will also talk about the topics that most of us just don't think about, pretending that we're going to live forever, pretending that we're going to stay healthy forever, pretending that all that we care about will live forever. And that's not true. And that's not what nature has, and somehow has gifted us. All is a beginning and all is an end. And so we'll talk about those topics after the break. Welcome back to Empowerment Radio. I'm here with my special guest, Dr. Ken Druck, who is the author of Courageous Aging. And before the break, we just talked about looking forward as one of the important aspects of aging. And you certainly have, as you said, more creativity, you feel more expansive. And part of the looking forward for you in the book was also about making a difference for the generations who come. And can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think it's a wonderful goal and mission in mind to say, well, yes, I may be leaving at some point soon, but I want to set already the stage and help these next generations to, have it easier or have it better or learn from my mistakes and the things that I have learned along the path.
I think, Friedemann, one of the great things that we have to look forward to, since we are accepting the idea that we're not going to live forever, and our form is going to change, and we move into this great mystery called death. One of the things we can do to bring meaning and purpose to our lives is to plant a giving tree that our children, our grandchildren, future generations can sit in the shade of, and that the sun can come through, and that we have a sense that we have given something that is going to improve the quality of life for future generations or for our children or grandchildren. And I think that shows that we are showing our gratitude, that as our lives, as we enter this new season of life, and perhaps in the third or fourth quarter of life, we're realizing how grateful we are. And as an expression of that gratitude, the life we've been given, this miracle that we've been given, we're going to pay the good that we've experienced forward. And we all have ways of doing that. Sometimes it's simply showing a kindness. Sometimes it's making a video talking about our background, our ancestors, who we were, that our grandchildren and their grandchildren will be able to watch in the future. Sometimes it's a gift that we give to make sure that one of the parks where we live will be preserved for our grandchildren or for future generations, or the environment will be protected. But everybody has their own individual way of doing this. But paying the good forward is one of the most gives meaning to life. And it shows that we've arrived at a level of acceptance that we can continue to do things even though we're not here. We can pay our gratitude forward in ways that will make a difference. But I think we have to do our work. It's hard work. For some people, it's the hardest work they will do in their life, to come to terms with this whole idea of impermanence, that our lives do not go on forever. And how do we reconcile that in an expansive way rather than being afraid and contracting? And there are specific things we can do to cultivate that kind of and make peace with life itself.
Well, and that is, like you said, in some ways often the hardest work, because it really requires a lot of attention. It sometimes requires the willingness to let go, to accept, and also to forgive, especially oneself. But then
Yes.
it also is this acceptance of loss. And you had certainly some loss in your life, but one of the hardest loss anyone can experience is when you lost the loss of a child, and you lost your daughter when she
Yes.
was just 21 years old. But what I
Yes.
found beautiful about how you wrote about it, and I believe truly that your daughter gave you a gift after her passing, is what happened when you heard her inside. Can you talk about this a little bit? Because I find this very comforting, what happened to you there.
Well, I think paradox is the highest form of understanding loss. My daughter is gone. When she was on a study abroad trip in India, and when her body was returned, thanks to the President Clinton at the time, when her body was returned home, it was clear that my daughter was gone. She was no longer in that body, that beautiful body that carried her for 21 years. But she's also here, gone, and she's here because her presence is so clear to me. She is right here. She's with me always. Her voice, her heart, her love resonates. And I believe that there is a kind of love that never dies, that a father has for a daughter, or a daughter has for her father, or that people have for their life partners, or their parents. And that love never dies. And the way we keep it alive is to continue to express it. Now, does that mean that I know what the true nature of the universe is, what life and death is? No, I don't. I don't know for certain what happens, but I get to bet my faith. In other words, I can make a guess and say, you know what, I hope and pray that somehow my daughter and I might be reunited in some way, shape, or form, that we would be together again. Now, that may sound like magical thinking, but who knows the true nature of life and death? I don't. We are soaring through space on a grain of sand in a universe that is so big and expansive and mysterious. How dare I be arrogant and presumptuous enough to say that I know what life is, or I know what death is. So I keep my heart open, and I keep my daughter alive in my heart. I tell her I love her every day, and I listen for her love. I feel her butterfly kisses. I feel her love, and so does her. I call her my angel daughter, and I have an earth daughter who lives not far from me as well. And she's a very intimate part of my life. When we started a foundation called the Jenna Druck Center in her name to help other families, we made her the Chief Angelic Officer, the CAO, and that was her position. Because I feel like she is my spiritual guide. But loss is, as you're saying, we have to become more grief literate and less grief avoidant.
Right.
And knowing you cannot age courageously unless and until you become more aware of how to process the losses. Because when we don't process the losses of our lives, when we try to outrun them and out-busy them and out-numb them or out-medicate them, we own the debt comes due eventually, and it comes due hard. But when we process the losses, we become the deeper version, more compassionate, wiser version of ourselves, and we become the more resilient, stronger version of ourselves, the more accepting of life, how it truly is.
I believe that, what you also mentioned in the book about aging and being able to expand the present moment and therefore live more in that present moment, almost like you're extending your life, has also to do with the relationships that you're in, that they become more fulfilling and love-centered, and we appreciate more the time we have. I noticed this with my parents who died a few years ago, both very shortly, one after another, and even though it was sad and there was grief, I also felt that in those last 5 years of their life, I did the maximum I could to spend time with them, to talk to them, to connect with them. So, in some ways, the loss wasn't as hard because there was no regret to it. And I think a lot of loss
Yes.
that we are dealing with has to do also with, oh, I wish. There is a feeling of we were so busy, we were so distracted, we were
Yes.
running around, and we were
Yes.
not really connecting. And so that may be also one way to really already prevent yourself from falling in one of those painful holes of loss, which is the regret, if you now spend that maximum energy and focus on those you really love and care about.
You hit it right in the center. That is the primary concern. We don't want to leave unfinished love. We don't want to leave one I love you left unsaid. We have this incredible opportunity to give it all away. Everything we have, to give it in a purposeful, loving way, and to leave what I call, and there's a chapter in the book called Leaving a Legacy of Love. That's it. That's the only legacy, not a legacy of undone, unspoken I love yous, unfinished business thing, or chaos, because that's the other element. The other way we say I love you is not to leave a mess. I started a project about a year and a half ago where I've got a lifetime of papers I've written and courses and speeches and files and clutter. And my parents also passed, so I have many of their things. How do I not leave a mess? If something happens to me, that my family is going to have to spend a year looking for things, getting organized. So it's such an expression of love when we put our house in order and we don't leave our families with a cluttered mess. And I've made that one of my goals. And I think, we don't do that because we're planning on dying, just as we don't buy life insurance because we're planning on dying. We buy it so that we can live at peace, knowing that we've taken care of what needed to be taken care of, and that our families will be left with a legacy of love.
Well, in this kind of creating order and decluttering your life, I think you cannot start early enough. But unfortunately, we are running out of time, but I want to have you just share maybe one thought for the future older generation that are right now in their 20s and 30s. What advice would you give them?
Well, I would look you in the eyes and have you look into my eyes. They're a little more crinkled. My hair is a little more gray. I look older than the younger version of myself. And I would smile at you. And I'd look at whatever version of you, whether you're whatever season of life, and I would look at you and smile and assure you that, you know what, it's okay. This is the way of life. And isn't it wonderful that we've been given this gift of meeting, of being able to talk, just as you and I today, Friedemann, have been able to share with one another. Isn't that a beautiful gift that we got to have, that we got to share, and to be grateful for it, and to hope for another conversation soon, or when we can meet again, or even meet, not over the telephone or over the radio, but to meet in person, to hope for the best, to plan for the best. There's an old saying, if you don't know where you're going, you'll get there. To plan for that best, to reimagine our best possible futures, and then to create a trajectory to live into that truth.
Wow.
And I look forward to meeting everybody. I look forward to meeting as many people as I possibly can. And I wish everybody a vibrant, long life, a good life, a beautiful and precious moment of sharing, and thank you and the Empowerment Radio for the service that you provide connecting all of us.
Well, I thank you. This was so wonderful, full of warmth and inspirations, and we could talk for hours, and hopefully we will meet at some
I will look
point
forward to
again.
that.
Me too. So I
I
thank you
will look
very
forward.
much. This was another hour of Empowerment Radio. Stay tuned for the next show. We will be back on Wednesday. Until then, take good care and enjoy every moment of this precious life. Goodbye.